Hey everyone, in this two-part series we're going to explore the relationship between soil, water, and containers. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Here are the 5 limiting factors for plant growth: soil, light, water, nutrients, and temperature and humidity. In this series, we're only concerned about soil and water. But we also got to talk about containers, because we can't talk about containers without talking about its effects on soil. And we can't talk about soil without talking about its effects and how it's affected by water, and how containers affect water. I found that these three are so interconnected that I just called them the Trifecta. Hey everyone, my name is Brian and welcome to This is a Plant. So when I was first starting out on my houseplant journey, I really didn't know what mixes or soils to even use. So naturally in this situation, we Google stuff. But the information was really scattered. So I buckled down and consolidated as much information as I could find and bring that to you. So first things first, why do we even need good soil? Wild plants grow perfectly fine without these fancy amendments and stuff. And yeah, you know what? You'd be correct. So roots need to be able to breathe. They need aeration, and they usually get that from earthworms and other burrowing creatures. But for our plants inside our homes, the worms and aerating bugs won't survive in our pots. So that's why we need to keep the soil as fluffy as possible so oxygen and air can actually reach the roots. Here's some terminology and stuff. Bases plus amendments equal potting mix. Think of bases as your foundation. It's usually the medium you start off with, and it's present in larger quantities than your amendments. And amendments are anything you add to your base. Amendments alter the behavior of your mix, and when both of these are combined, it becomes your potting mix. But technically you can use potting mix as an amendment to different mixes, but you'll see that in the overviews. So let's move on. Soil and potting mix are often used interchangeably. Fun fact, potting mixes don't actually contain any soil in it. But from this point on in this episode, when I say soil, I'm talking about potting mix. The soil and amendments we'll be covering will be compared on their water retention, drainage, compaction, pH, and nutrient retention. Water retention is the amount and duration of water held within the soil. Drainage is the rate of excess water to exit the soil. Compaction is the compression of soil particles. pH is basically the measure of acidity and alkalinity of a solution. If you're a beginner, you don't have to be too concerned about pH just yet. We'll be looking into pH in a different video. And nutrient retention is just the amount and duration of nutrients held within the soil. This will also be covered in a later video. When I say as is, it means you can use it straight out the bag, and the amendments are optional. First up, we have potting mix. It might come in different names like all-purpose mix, indoor potting mix, moisture control, something, but generally these are pretty much the same. As long as it has the word potting or container, then you're pretty much good. Do not use garden soil. Garden soil goes actually in the ground, not in your containers. Most potting mixes are going to use peat or coir as their base. Then they throw in some perlite or vermiculite or some sand or some pieces of bark to help keep it a little bit fluffier. Here's an overview for potting mix. When used as is, it has high water retention, moderately fast drainage, compaction over time, neutral pH, and high nutrient retention. As an amendment, add to increase water retention, add to increase nutrient retention. So let's look at peat first. So peat is actually just a combination of decayed organic matter. So when you go and try and find peat, it has to have the word peat in it. It can have other words like sphagnum, peat moss, except cocoa peat. Cocoa peat is not peat, apparently. So what's sphagnum? Sphagnum is actually a type of moss that grows in peat bogs. Peat bogs are just wetlands. So in order to harvest the sphagnum and the peat underneath, they have to drain the bogs and let it dry, and then come in and take the top layer off, which is usually just the sphagnum, and then the bottom layer, which is the peat. That's why it's usually called sphagnum peat moss. But they also sell sphagnum moss, and it's usually just dried, so it's pretty much just a long shoot of the sphagnum moss. But now you may be asking yourself what happens to the peat bogs afterwards. Do they just regenerate, or do they come back in a few years? Unfortunately, no, they're just gone. So once harvested, these wetlands don't come back. at least not for like hundreds of years. And these wetlands are home to numerous species of frogs, insects, and birds and other wildlife. And wetlands also act as natural carbon sinks, so they grab CO2 from the air and store it down in their little water holes. The problem isn't that we'll run out of peat. The problem is that clearing of these wetlands release not only the stored CO2, but also methane, which is 30 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Draining of these wetlands also release accumulated metals, like mercury, into the surrounding environment. Then once drained, these dry lands are prone to peat fires. Which release even more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So what's being done about it? Restoration projects are trying to replace bogs that were lost, and conservationists are trying to prevent losing any more. Here's an overview for peat. When used as a base, it has high water retention, moderate drainage, compaction over time, moderately high acidity, 3.5 to 4.5 pH, varies by manufacturer, high nutrient retention. When used as an amendment, add to increase water retention, add to increase acidity, varies by manufacturer, add to increase nutrient retention, but overall it carries high environmental concerns. The next base we're going to look at is coir. Coir is made from the fibers extracted from the coconut husk that surround the hard shell of the coconut many of us are used to seeing. There are many uses for this fiber, like making rope, mats, fillers for mattresses and pillows, ground covering, brushes, and other things. Coir is highly resistant to compaction but is also nutrient poor and can even compete with roots when used as the only growing medium. The instructions say to place the coir in 9 gallons of water, which is about 34 liters, and it's supposed to expand to make 18 gallons, about 68 liters. So unless you need to use all of that, maybe cut it down to the size you need. So let's see how this small piece of coir expands when I place it into some warm water.
Sound and shockwaves roll over the men huddled in the trenches. Never before have we had such a close-up view.
Okay, it wasn't that dramatic, but here's an overview for coir. When used as a base, it has high water retention, moderate drainage, less compaction over time, moderate acidity, 5.5 to 6.5 pH, varies by manufacturer, but has selective nutrient retention. Used as an amendment, add to increase water retention, add to decrease compaction over time, is a renewable resource. Other potting mixes that you're most likely going to find is cactus, palm, and citrus potting mix. Are great for cacti, succulents, and any desert-loving plants. Here's an overview for cactus mix. When used as is, it has moderately low water retention, moderate drainage, compaction over time, a neutral pH, and moderate nutrient retention. To use as an amendment, add to decrease water retention, add to increase drainage. Next is orchid potting mix. These usually contain larger to smaller pieces of bark, and that works best for orchids and bromeliads because they're epiphytes. And epiphytes are defined as non-parasitic plants that just grow on other plants. Here's an overview for orchid mix. When used as is, it has moderate water retention, moderately fast drainage, less compaction over time, has a neutral pH, varies by manufacturer, and moderate nutrient retention. As an amendment, add to increase drainage. With any of these potting mixes, you could definitely just use them straight out the bag. But if you're looking for something specific, you might want to use some amendments. The first amendment we're going to look at is perlite. Perlite is formed when lava is rapidly cooled and then it turns into this hard, dense rock called obsidian. Then the obsidian is hydrated, usually by groundwater, over 100 years. Then that becomes perlite ore. And if you heat this to around 900 Celsius, 1700 degrees Fahrenheit, it softens and then causes the water to vaporize. And then it expands. And then it forms this fluffy, porous perlite. Perlite is also used in many other applications, like filtering out yeast and hot particles from your favorite beer. Here's an overview for perlite. When used as is, no water retention, fast drainage, no compaction, neutral pH, no nutrient retention. As an amendment, add to decrease water retention, add to increase drainage, add to decreased compaction, add to decreased nutrient retention. So next up we have vermiculite. This is formed from the weathering or natural breakdown or hydrothermal alteration of phyllosilicates, like mica. So just like perlite, once it's heated, it expands, the water vaporizes, and you get vermiculite. Unlike perlite, vermiculite actually retains more water due to its physical chemical structure. Now, if you do a Google search of vermiculite, you might run across something that says asbestos, vermiculite, something something, contamination, death. So what's the deal? Okay, from the year 1919 to 1990, a mine near a small town in the beautiful state of Montana, that's Glacier National Park by the way, 70% of all the vermiculite used in the United States actually came from this one small mine. But next to this mine was also an asbestos deposit. During the mining process, some of this asbestos got into the vermiculite, so there you go. But nowadays, horticultural vermiculite is screened and contains no asbestos. Here's an overview for vermiculite. When used as is, it has high water retention, fast drainage, no compaction, neutral pH, high nutrient retention. As an amendment, add to increase water retention, add to increase drainage, add to decrease compaction, add to increase nutrient retention. Next amendment is sand. Sand is very interesting when it's added to soil. We'll see sand in action in part 2 of this series. So for the sake of time, this will be short, like very short, because here's the overview. Low water retention, moderately slow drainage, no compaction, neutral pH, no nutrient retention. As an amendment, add to decrease water retention, add to decrease drainage, add to decrease compaction, and add to decrease nutrient retention. There were so many other soils and amendments that I didn't even have a chance to cover in this video, but I will in a later video. Let's take a look at that trifecta again. We talked plenty about soil already, and remember we were mainly concerned about water retention, drainage, and compaction. Now let's take a look at containers. There are only 3 things to keep in mind about this category: material, size, and drainage. Material of the containers goes from porous to non-porous. And porous just meaning having minute spaces or tiny holes through which liquid or air may pass. Unglazed terracotta is one example. This material is very forgiving towards beginners and overwaterers, since air can pass through the sides to reach the soil and the roots. Water will also be able to diffuse through the container, which will allow for faster evaporation. Other materials include ceramics, plastics, and glass. These are non-porous, so air and moisture exchange only happens through the top. If you're using wood, always use a plastic liner, unless you like that deteriorated look or water everywhere. Be cautious when using metal containers. Keep them away from heat sources and direct sunlight, because they'll cook your soil and your roots. Now for the size. This is simple. The larger the pot, the longer it's going to take to dry. Lastly, drainage holes are highly encouraged. If there aren't any drainage holes, you can use plastic and just place it in there. Or you can drill a hole into it. Or you can pot up the plant directly into the container. But this is only recommended for advanced users. Now let's quickly talk about water. There are only 3 categories most houseplants can fall under. Number 1, soil must be completely dry in between waterings. Number 2, soil must be slightly dry in between waterings. And number 3, soil must remain moist at all times. If you count aquatic plants, then yeah, that's number 4. But we'll talk about that next time. Water is such a huge topic, it's gonna need its own episode. In part 2, I'm gonna go in much more detail about these categories. Alright, so now let's put everything into practice. Here I have a Zamioculcas zamifolia, also known as the ZZ plant. This is hands down my favorite plant. So now that we know our plant, let's figure out its water requirements. It's native to the continent of Africa. Desert biomes don't rain often, but when it does rain, it rains a lot, and almost all at once. So this plant requires the soil to be completely dry in between waterings. Let's choose what pot it's gonna go in. I chose a terracotta pot because that's all I had. Terracotta, we know, is porous, so it's gonna dry out a little bit faster. This is a 6-inch pot, so we know it's not gonna retain a lot of moisture. And it also has a drainage hole. So now let's choose the soil. I decided to go about 30-80? 30-70. But anyway, you can go a little bit higher if you want. You can even go 50-50 if you want. But this is how I choose it, so let's start. Now we get to play in the dirt. So I know I threw a lot of information at you guys today, and I may have made it seem like plants are this difficult thing, but they're really not. More advanced gardeners will tell you that they kind of knew this information already, but it was like intuitive or instinctive or just second nature. And that's basically what a green thumb means. But for those of you like me, I like to learn visually. So that's how I wanted to present it, the way it looks in my mind. So I hope I didn't discourage you. That's the last thing I want to do, because plants are fun. It brings life into your home, you know? So if you haven't already, I really encourage you to take up this hobby. In the beginning, you're just gonna make a few mistakes, and that's okay. You know, when I was starting out, I was always self-conscious that I wasn't doing it right, that I was messing up way too much or something. We put off doing something because we're afraid of failing. Because if you never start something, then you'll never be able to fail. And I've lived like that for so long. But I got tired of living like that. I was tired of putting my life on hold because of what other people would say, or what they would think, or how I'd be perceived. Because now I just really want to have fun. I want to do things my way. But I made a lot of mistakes too. And I guess I had a lot of failures. But that's how you learn. In this day and age, it seems like everyone has to be perfect. And if you fail, then that means you're not good enough for something. So it's normal to be afraid of making mistakes. It kind of makes you stronger. I wonder if they have a saying about that. But as long as you get back up and try again, then you'd even surprise yourself. And those mistakes aren't as scary as they once seemed. It's like fuel. And it pushes you to get stronger. It pushes you to work harder. It pushes you to work smarter. And then you start to feel more confident about yourself. And you realize that the biggest critic of them all was you. You were the voice holding yourself back all this time. So I guess I'm saying, don't be afraid to start something. I know, it's easier said than done, but the more you do it, the easier it'll get. Because just like plants, we all have to start from the bottom. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in part 2. Hi! I really hope you enjoyed the video. This video actually took a really long time to make, but I really enjoyed the whole process, like a lot. Breakdowns and all, you know? But it took so long because I won't release anything unless it's quality, if it's scientifically sound, and if my perfectionist side is at least satisfied with the results, then it's a go. So I need your help to do that. So if it's available to where you are in life right now, consider supporting the channel on Patreon. But if money's tight, I get it, you know? Then like the video, leave a comment, please subscribe, and share it with a friend. Anything you do will be such a big help, and I'd really appreciate it. Alright, that was my spiel. Okay, I'm gonna go now. Be kind to yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.